My job here today is to, really follow on from the talk that we've just heard. And I think it's clear from really all the presenters today, both, the experts, the vendors, the case studies, that digital transformation is really happening. But, as William Gibson said, the future is here, it's just unevenly distributed. And I want to try and help close some of those gaps between organisations. And look, it's not just hype. I'm not one to buy into the whole hierarchy versus hierarchy or blow up the org structure or stuff like that. It's nice and all, but what we are genuinely seeing, and you've seen particularly in the case studies today of real organisations, not solving every problem, but starting to solve some of the really important ones. And so that's exciting. I think it's really tremendously exciting. However, more does not equal necessarily better. What we're also seeing is a huge increase in complexity within our organisations. So, okay, great, we went to Office 365 and it delivers all this wonderful functionality and the waffle that just keeps getting bigger and bigger. I don't know, it'll fill up the screen at some point, but that's just the beginning, because we've also done Facebook for Work and we're using Box for the clients, and we're delivering Salesforce, who are then using Salesforce Chatter, and oh my goodness, we are now seeing an enormous flowering of technology capabilities, but for the human. As Naaki so beautifully said, it's about the person in all of this, and have we delivered the experience that they need and they deserve? Maybe not enough, and that's what we're going to explore today. So what I want to show is, as much as anything else, is I want to show you some great examples. Some examples from around the globe that have come from all of the years of the awards that we've run, so you can see some of this stuff in the flesh. And again, not solving every problem, but solving a bunch of really interesting problems. So hi, I'm James. You can tell from my funny accent that I'm from Australia. I flew here from Sydney. It's a really pretty city, Chicago. I've been on the boat to get the architecture tour, and I've been to the gardens. Delightful. So thank you for having me. I've been in this space now 20 years, and for those 20 years, I have had an unbroken, abnormal passion for intranets. And I'm not afraid to use the I word. They're not dead, they're not going away. They exist within the digital workplace, and we'll talk about that. But this is my thing. I love this space, particularly because of the people in it. Over the years, I've written and published 3 books that are perhaps the most powerful books for brightening up your workplace, because the covers are excellent, right? Super brightly coloured. I'd recommend them for that. So, and they cover off all aspects of the last book I particularly like, which is around what are the business goals of an intranet if it's going to be essential. But we'll talk more about that later. At step 2, we've also published one of the largest collections of best practice knowledge in the world. How many people have read some of the step 2 stuff? Oh, see, I'm always surprised. The rest of you, my goodness, have you got some great stuff to explore. It's faceted and everything. So delve into it and get what you want. We've also been running our awards, the Intranet and Digital Workplace Awards, now for 11 years. Our judging is currently underway. A lot of the examples I'll be sharing are drawn from those awards. And the awards are fundamentally about what is the business value of what is being done. How has it helped staff? How has it benefited the business as a whole? And that's what we make the entrance really work on, and we see great stuff as a result. So, I'm going to be talking about 3 things. The first is making sense of the future. So there's an awful lot coming, as we've talked about, and look, it can be overwhelming. So how do we distill this? If we know that robots are coming or ambient intelligence, then what does that mean for us today? What does that mean for us tomorrow? So I'm going to start by providing you with a model around that. We're also going to be looking at the real world. As I said, I want to show examples. I'm going to pack in as many screenshots as I can possibly get within the allotted time. And that's going to really ground the discussions. And then finally, it comes back to saying, okay, when you go back to your organisations, when you sit down at your desks, how are you going to proceed? How do we solve the really big needs, the big problems within the organisation from a small start, from limited support, with practically no budget, with maybe being a lone voice in the organisation? How do we bridge that gap from the relentless needs of the day-to-day intranet or digital workplace while thinking about the future? And I'll swing back around a model to look at that as well. So if we start at the first one, making sense of the future, then I guess, look, I'll start with a definition. And our definition of the digital workplace is pretty simple. It's all of that stuff, all of the platforms, the tools, the environments for work. We all have one. Sadly, most of them are crap. So we'd like to make them better. But the question is, what does better look like? And I think that's where it starts to become super interesting. Because for me, a great digital workplace is around saying it's seamless, it's frictionless, it's easy, usable, productive for work. And it's those attributes which is what we really need to be striving for. And it's those attributes that are going to make life easier for staff. And so I'm going to look at what that means again in practice in a second. I've also been talking about employee experience. And employee experience is another concept alongside the digital workplace that we are seeing is getting substantial traction. That actually when we're going to talk to senior leaders, people like heads of HR are saying, oh yes, we're already thinking about this. They're not necessarily sure what to do, but it's absolutely in their minds. Now, what is the employee experience? Well, it is the sum total of interactions between our workforce and our organisation. And as Naoki said, that starts or should start before the person even joins the organisation. It's from the recruitment process. It's when they're approved. It's when they come into the organisation. Do they have a desk? Do they have a laptop? It's about every interaction from IT to HR to how they connect with customers. Now that's an enormous concept with an enormous scope. So luckily, I guess, our bit's the digital bit of that. Right, so we don't have to solve the facilities aspects, we don't have to set HR policies, but of course, we need to work alongside them. So, we've talked about the digital workplace, we've talked about the employee experience, but what I haven't talked yet about is how do we make sense of the future? And how do we understand what is coming now and what is coming later, and what do we do with that? So, last year we introduced a Step 2 digital workplace radar as a simple model for, I guess, conceptualising how we need to deal with the different things that are coming down the pipeline. And what it says is there are a bunch of technologies and ideas that are in the process of landing. And actually we saw this in the DWG survey, the results of which came out just a few days ago, around what is the top list of things that organisations that you are currently tackling. And well, it's the intranet. And again, I'm not scared of the I word. Yes, it has a heap of baggage, but actually we are in the process of reinventing what it means, by breathing new life into it and positioning it as the enterprise front door. We're also revisiting the whole social and collaboration piece, and again saying, yeah, the technology was nice and all, but what are we going to do in terms of humans, in terms of the business and making stuff of this? Obviously, the cloud has become an ever-present issue, and so these are all things that we need to be thinking about now. But there's some stuff that is circling. It hasn't landed yet, but we can see that it might arrive in the not-too-distant future. And so as things like the employee experience, which people are talking about, but they're not necessarily doing much, or at least funding much around. Bizarrely, it's mobility. I say bizarrely because 3 or 4 years ago, it was absolutely clear that mobile was going to transform our organisations just as it did the consumer space, and then Yeah, and then, I don't know, I went around talking about it, and others did as well, and then we're still waiting. It turns out that there's just a bunch of practical, annoying IT and security and risk issues that we just haven't untangled yet. So it's super important, but it's still circling. We see things like bots, again, that we are, as the leaders, starting to talk about. We are going to see great things happen, but clearly it's probably not this year in force, maybe it's next year. Likewise, search, which has been the number one thing your users have complained about for the last decade, and what have we done about it? Nothing. So, fingers crossed, it's going to land sometime in the future, but again, we're not doing it quite yet. I hold out some hopes that it is not too far off. And then there's the things that are still in flight. They're off in the distance. We know we should be thinking about them. So this is things like AI, about robots, ambient intelligence, ambient environments. We know this is important, but are our jobs going to get replaced by bots next year? No. You know, everything is better when you use the word Watson, but is that going to make us redundant? No, not yet, but they're working on it. Deep text is actually an area that if you haven't been looking at, you should, because this is about saying this vast body of structured and unstructured information we haven't done much about, and there's some really good stuff around this. There's a great book by Tom Reamy that I'd highly recommend, so if you type deep text into Amazon, you'll get some good stuff. So that's the radar. But before I go on to talk about examples, I'm going to invite collaboration. I'm going to invite you to ask any questions that are in your mind, and better yet, I'm going to bribe you with a reward that will become apparent. So, do you have a question about the radar, about what's coming or what's here? Excellent. Okay. What is the question? What is deep text? Look, that's a good question, and you deserve a book for that. So thank you very much for that. You scored that. You're in my workshop. You know what was coming. See, you know, to the victor goes the spoils. So look, deep text is saying that search engines have always had immense analytical capability. And so when they index stuff, they actually do a pile of incredible smarts, which we then boil down to a single search field and a list of results. So if you start looking at entity extraction, so where you start to pull out names of people, companies, and products, once you start to mine data, not just free text, you can actually start to maybe do another take on tagging. Maybe we can do that better by machine. Maybe if we go to what I call a post-hierarchical intranet, where we blow up the hierarchy, that is brilliant in theory, but without something like deep text, it's not going to work. People will be merely lost if we don't give people better tools to understand what we're delivering. But that's a whole conversation of its own, for which I'm not fully qualified to talk about. Another question, great.
Where would you put digital signs and smart boards? So your smart board, your surface board, and your whatever Google calls it?
Oh yeah, so smart signage and interactive boards and stuff like that. Yeah, look, it's funny. Digital signage is actually probably one of those things that has landed, but no one's necessarily noticed, because they're everywhere within our organisations, peering on us in every floor. But I know organisations that even now, someone has to go around with a USB key to update the screens. Oh my God. So I definitely think it is something that we should be tackling now, because it's part of the digital workplace. It is part of our internal communication strategy, or at least it sure as heck should be. And in terms of the interactive boards, yeah, that's probably still circling. No one's exactly sure what that's going to look like. There's been a heap of tries in the past. Is this try going to be different? I don't know. I don't think we're going to get the answer this year on that. So on money, yes, thank you. Yep, one more question. So the question was, why is Internet of Things not landing? Because of all the stuff that Amazon has done with Alexa, with one-press ordering, smart cities, all of which are out in the real world. This is the digital workplace radar. And have we got one-click ordering, or are we using Alexa within organisations? No. And have we worked out what that would look like? No. So again, it's one of those things we know is going to transform stuff, but in the workplace, we're not exactly sure where it's going to fit. And I would be delighted to hear from anyone who's currently doing anything about that right now. And maybe some of you guys are innovating that. But this is the idea. The idea about the radar is to help put shape around it. And by the way, create your own for your own organisation, because there will be a different mix for you than my generic one up here. But look, let me talk about some examples. And I'm going to power through a bunch. You can ask me questions at the end of this section. I know more than I show, so I'll be able to tell you some more. So look, one of the most delightful examples I've seen in ages is from Coles, which is one of the big supermarkets within Australia. So equivalent of UK's Tesco, not as big as a Walmart, but it had 100,000 retail staff. That's the staff in the supermarkets or packing the shelves or behind the scenes in the warehouses that were treated as second-class citizens, that did not have email, did not have access to the intranet, that got communicated to by notices stuck on a notice board in the staff canteen, which is ridiculous. And they realised that. They realised that they redid the stores until they were glorious in the physical world, but if they were going to create delighted customers, then they had to create delighted staff. And so what they delivered as part of a whole campaign was My Coles. And it looks like this. And it's in many ways super obvious. It gives you things like an electronic payslip, an online leave form, which we've all had for ages, but these folks didn't. It gives you corporate news. Probably best of all, it gives you access to all of the perks of working in a shopping centre. So this is about all of the staff benefits, which could be anything from this week, get 10 tins of baked beans for $1, or it could be go into the chance to meet the celebrity chef and do a one-on-one cooking session with them. All of this stuff was simply invisible to the largest proportion of the organisation. What was super powerful is that they delivered it from day one from mobile, and actually people used their own personal email accounts to access it, so they actually couldn't make it mandatory, they made it voluntary. But within the first year, more than 90% of people were using it, and regularly. And what I like about this is what they didn't set out to do was to create an intranet. This is on Office 365, but they did not set out to deliver a cloud solution. This is not a collaboration platform. This is not a digital workplace platform. This is driven by a team called employee engagement. And for them, this was an employee engagement solution. And as such, taking people from the dark ages into the modern age that we take for granted, this is amazingly powerful. But what was actually not a lot of money. This is one of those screenshots that I put up, and I give people a chance to have a think about it. So this is the HR landing page of Telstra, which is the biggest telco in Australia. Hands up anyone who has an HR landing page like this. No, half a hand. How did this come about? This came about because they were setting about to do a standard redesign with all the best practices. They had all the HR content. They went off, they did usability testing, they did tree testing to structure this in a way that would be best suited for staff, and they were not satisfied. Because actually they'd gone to some of the sessions that we'd run, and they said, well, wait a second, why are we doing this? Well, we're doing this actually to reduce the number of calls to the HR service centre. Okay, well, what are those calls? And so they looked at them, and a lot of them were super simple, like, how many days of leave do I have available to me? Now, I want to highlight they could already look that up themselves, because Telstra had SAP. So they could log into SAP, oh God, please no. Or they could just ring up, and so they rang up. And so actually there wasn't a gap of technology or functionality, there was a gap in experience. And so what they delivered was a really powerful experience that brought to the surface all of the stuff that they needed. And again, the impact of this is huge because they designed the user experience beautifully. So for example, by default, the pay column was blurred. That way, if someone walks past, they don't go, is that how much you're paid? Or alternatively, is that how much you're paid? Either way, embarrassing for someone, if not both parties. So they blurred it by default with a nice little button called Show Pay. And through the magic of CSS, makes it visible. And so by crafting every element of the employee experience, they're able to offer and deliver real value. And so they were actually able to reduce the calls to the HR call centre and along these key topics by between 12 and 40%. And in a big organisation, that's a lot of calls and it's a lot of money. And again, they are not replacing SAP. They are not replacing the other business systems. They are delivering a better employee experience. Likewise with this example. So this is from a Dutch shipping company that has a fleet of liquid natural gas tankers that go around the globe. And this is what they call the bridge. And I include it here because, again, it's another perfect example of a single screen that talks stories. Because you can look at it and go, I don't know anything about shipping, but that seems pretty useful to me. Because actually, shipping is incredibly rules-bound. The amount of paperwork you have to generate for all the ports and for the customs and for all the safety people is literally a foot of paper per journey, per ship. Now, they went through a digital transformation and they replaced a lot of that paper with documents in box in this instance, but this was the next step where they delivered an employee experience that matched exactly what staff needed. And they had a really powerful goal. They said, our aim is to save 33 minutes of staff time per day. Not quite sure where the 33 came from, but hey, 33. They then said, we are going to check, and we are only going to include an element in the user experience if we can prove it saves time. And so that laser focus on delivering business outcomes is then reflected in the user experience. And this pulls together a vast amount. Everything from the details in the fleet and the vessel details and the agent details, and the fact it's 9 days until the next dry dock, and this is 3 staff crew changes and the voyage schedule and all of the rest of the stuff. And again, it's an example where if you take the next step, if you step away from the idea that we're doing an intranet project or we're doing a digital workplace project, if you focus on the employee experience, you then start to craft the entire experience. So you're able to, in this instance, to determine which of the ships that you need to follow as an individual. It gives you your tasks that are fully integrated into the system. It shows you all of the checklists that you have to do for each trip, and that's an enormous list. And so this is a small Dutch shipping company. They don't have a lot of money. It didn't cost them a lot of money. And so that's where it becomes super interesting, where we can start to say maybe things that we thought were impossible before now become more possible. And what I'm trying to do, by the way, is I'm trying to mix up the size of the organisations for you. I'm trying to mix up the countries. I'm primarily picking places outside the US because you don't necessarily get a chance to see them. So, and I'm not saying you should do all of these ideas or in fact any of them. But what I am trying to inspire you is to say, oh, that's an interesting idea, I'll pick that one. So this, for example, is from an Australian university. And this is their digital workplace that comes at the end of a very long and very productive journey for them. And this homepage has undergone many stages of evolution and is now incredibly rich in terms of what it offers, access to key systems, things like the shuttle bus and the campus details, and all of this is targeted to me as an individual. And trust me, universities are not simple places. If you think you're a big corporate and you are much harder than a university, you're wrong. Universities are amongst the most difficult organisations in the world in which to do this, which is what I think makes this example so delightful. And they've said things like, right, we want to be able to allow people to craft their launch pad about what applications they need, and that's not uncommon. What's nice is even the stuff that they've done on the content pages. So this is a classic intranet content page, but actually corporate content, campus content, faculty content. They actually have a global local model that knows where you are in the organisation in terms of location and organisational unit, and it gives you a tailored, joined up set of resources for a whole pile of key tasks and information across the university. And this is an incredibly powerful idea. We have only seen a few organisations do it because it is fiendishly hard behind the scenes. But again, it says, I don't care where you are. I don't want to expose you to the complexity of this organisation. Instead, I am going to focus on you as an individual, and I will take on the responsibility for delivering value to you. And this is what we should be doing. We should be cutting through the complexity at all stages and in all ways. So they even went to crafting their own publication process and publication environment, sitting on top of SharePoint, I think, because they said we can only deliver a great experience if we deliver the authors and the content owners a great experience. And frankly, we haven't done that very well in most organisations. So they've really dotted the I's and crossed the T's of the entire employee experience. So now there's only two more that I'm going to show you. Then you can ask me a pile of questions about what's possible and what's not. Aha, I found my clicker. Actually, it's not one. Technology. So the second last example I'm going to give is from Merck. And I just need to highlight that for confusing corporate reasons, this is not your Merck. The other Merck sold off the rights to the names to the US, and so there is a completely separate US Merck than everyone else. I have no idea how that works. But anyway, this is Merck for the rest of the world, not you. Go figure. And they are focusing on directly, head on, the challenge of being a global organisation. And this is Eva, their digital workplace. And what is super nice about it is the things across the bottom, where it says, yes, we've got a lot of branding because that's what they're about. They were changing their corporate brand. And yes, we've got some corporate news at the top, but below is a tailored set of what they called rooms. And a room might be a geographical location, a room might be a business unit, a room might be a business process or a project. Eva knows again where you sit, and it tailors what is delivered based on that. But you also get the ability to then pick the additional rooms that are relevant to you beyond that. And this is one of a number of very elegant ways of not glossing over the complexities, not saying, yes, we're a global organisation, but here have the one intranet anyway. It's about saying there are global needs and there are local needs, and we are going to explore ways of tackling them. And this is through to individual projects and individual areas of the organisation. And in truth, this is a SharePoint team site. No different from the technology you've got. So this is actually not a technology example. This is an employee experience and digital workplace example because it's as much the governance model behind it that makes this powerful. That says there is a dual or two-way ownership and responsibility. There is a local owner who has the responsibility for the content itself. But there is also a broader space and region owners who say we are responsible for ensuring some degree of coherency. that ensure that the right stuff goes into the right spots. And this enables the organisation to untangle stuff, to actually come together and have the right conversations about stuff which they haven't had a chance to do before. And again, as part of the digital workplace, that's powerful because it's the conversations which really add value. The last example I want to give is from Swisscom, and I love this for a lot of reasons. So this is their homepage. News. A lot of news. It's all news. It's quite pretty. So, okay, so what? Well, the so what is that actually this is one of 3 homepages. The second homepage is this one, because they have said that whole battle over pixels on the homepage, we're moving beyond that. We've done that, so now actually let's create different homepages to meet different needs. So this is their work tab, I guess. And this is amazingly powerful to see again. So this is their quick links, it's in Swiss German, sorry. Documents in the middle, workspaces. This is their collaboration on the right-hand side, financial figures out of the finance system. And by the way, in the middle is the single most powerful, most important thing that every digital workplace should have, which is the cafeteria menu. But this is nice, right? This is, again, tailored to the needs of staff, recognising that not all staff have the same needs. They've got notification systems that pulls into a single spot notifications from multiple systems. And this is the area that they are most working on, and they're innovating. And what is powerful about this, and what I mentioned in my workshop yesterday, is that this says we are going as Swisscom to own the employee experience. The 3 top-level pages are custom built entirely, which is actually not that hard. Underneath sits a sea of SharePoint sites and all the rest. They haven't touched those, they've done a little bit on them at least. But what this says is APIs. Actually, they're not hard. We're actually going to pull the information out of the systems, and yes, we're going to customize, but only those 3 top-level pages, because that's where we can add the greatest value. And what's really nice, I had Thomas Mader, who's responsible for delivering this, speak at our conference in Australia 2 weeks ago, and there I learned that he is establishing the digital workplace as a service, where actually it provides APIs that other systems like digital signage could use to draw news out of the internet into other platforms. And what's nice, and the reason why I leave it to last, is that they have now got to the point where their digital workplace is managed as a product and has a product life cycle with 2 major releases, so a major release every 2 years and 3 minor releases every year, and they don't need to justify this funding. They get this funding automatically because that's the level of maturity that they've got to in this. And heck, it didn't happen overnight and it was not easy, but this growing maturity has got them to a strong place, and then, onwards and upwards from here to ever better digital capabilities. So, that is my run through of a whole pile of different things, and I have a little bit of time left. I have time for one question now with a reward. Is there anything that jumped out that you want to know more about or you're unsure about? Down the front. How do you know when you've arrived? It is, of course, a trick question. Thank you. Because, of course, there is no endpoint. So thank you for the leading question. That's good. Look, I think one of the most powerful things, for example, is version numbers. Because if you are delivering an intranet that is whatever it is now, 3.0, then immediately the question is, well, what are we getting in 3.1 or even 3.01? And so even a simple thing such as version numbering can start to break open the idea that there is a thing. Because let's be clear, the digital workplace is not a thing. It is not a product, it is not a platform, it is the employee experience, the digital component of that. So it's a lifelong journey, and we need to find better ways of communicating that. And I think version numbers can help. But I promised to pull all this together, which I'm going to do in 2 minutes, because it's actually really easy. Because it works like this. For things that have landed, you should be doing projects. You should be running projects that tackle these immediate priorities, and you should be making progress around them. So that's the stuff that has landed. The stuff that's circling, well, this is what you should have a strategy on. Right, that talks about what you're going to do next, where the digital workplace is heading and what it's likely to involve, because this is the foreseeable future. And then the last ring, the in flight, right, so this is where you should have a vision. And this is where you should be engaging with your organisation and senior leaders. And then the fun bit is how you combine these three things. Because projects, they run at a sequence of, I don't know, every 3 or 6 months, right? And so, or agile, but they should be steadily, progressively, relentlessly delivering improvements and updates. With a strategy, you should have a strategy every single year. Because every single year you should put in for a budget request when the budgeting time comes around, because if you don't ask, you don't get. And so at any given point, you should have a strategy, maybe as little as a napkin, scribbled on, hopefully more than that, hopefully not a vast thing. And then with a vision, this is something that you just quietly talk about when you get a chance, because there are 3 traps to avoid. First trap, doing only projects. This is the constantly reactive, dealing with all the stuff that hits us, which we have to do. It's worthy work, but we never get to poke our head up over the cubicle. If we do only strategies, hoping for the big project that will make the giant leap, then it never comes. Or when it comes, it says, yes, yes, here's a quarter of the money. And meanwhile, you've done nothing. Equally, if you are just the vision guy, if you spend all your time talking about AI and robots and augmented reality, then they will consider you a Fruit Loop. You'll be humoured for a point, but ultimately the organisation will make you redundant because they've become bored. So it's about doing each of the 3 things in parallel. And that would be my advice to you. This is the practical way of making progress. Because at the end of the day, it comes down to this. The people in the room, you folks, right? You are at the leading edge of the digital workplace change. I know, I've talked with a bunch of you in the breaks, and no, really, you are doing great stuff, and you are going to show us what the digital workplace is going to be in the near future. And that's, I think, exciting. More than just the hype, there's now starting to be the reality. And so what I would say is dream big, but deliver often. And on that note, I will say thank you.
All right, James Robertson. So James, do I have your permission the next time someone pitches me a story for CMS Wire on AI, I can say, no thanks, you're a Fruit Loop?
No, that's not what I'm saying. We need to talk about the future. So I'm very friendly, by the way. I love to talk in the breaks. I'm Australian.
Thanks, James.
Thank you very much.